I'm Jimmy Bach, and this is History with Jimmy, along with my producer Chandler Holmes, and two local historians are here to tell some stories today. We have Mr. Brian Caverly and Mr. Jake Baluta. Jake also has an antique shop. He's also donated different items to the museum, and we're very grateful for these guys coming today to continue to help us with history in the area. So I'm going to start off with Brian to tell a little bit about whatever you want to talk about.
Okay, Jim. We were asked to kind of give some remembrances of Shickshinny in our early days, the places and people and events. And what I did is took a mental trip through my memory bank, through the streets of Shickshinny, to just in memory look at the buildings and remember what events took place there and what people were there. And so I'm going to do that for a little bit here. And I'm going to start in my parents' backyard. This would have been probably 1947 or 1948. I was born in 1943. But I'm walking through the back gate into the alley behind my parents' house, and I walk down to Union Street. And the second house down was the Alschuler house, which later became the Probst house. And Dr. Alschuler and his wife and three sons lived there. His son, Dickie, was one of my earliest good friends. And he had two older brothers. The three of us used to play cowboys on the hill behind my parents' house. And that family moved, I think, when I was in first or second grade. And I haven't talked to any of them since then. Rounding the corner past Alschuler's house was a store run by Barney Culp. Barney was a radio repairman originally. Later he also did televisions. And this is in the days when this was all tubes. And Barney did a good business there, but from a kid's standpoint, it was great because he also sold penny candy. And in addition to the penny candy, he would make popsicles. He bought soda up at Crystal Sodas in West Anticoke, and he would take a large glass, probably 10 ounces or so, fill it with soda, and they usually were the fruit-type sodas, cherry soda or orange soda. And when it started to freeze, he'd put a popsicle stick in it, and then he'd let it freeze the rest of the way. And you could buy one of those popsicles for 3 or 4 cents or a nickel, I guess. It wasn't very expensive. And they'd last you the whole day long. Unfortunately, they'd usually melt before you could eat all of them. My favorite dinner was a Three Musketeers bar, because in those days there were large bars for a nickel, and you could actually break them into 3 pieces so you could share them with your friends. So we spent a lot of time at Barney's, back and forth from my parents' house. Traveling on down Union Street, there were a lot of houses there. When you went past the houses, you came to the steps that led up to Parker Hill from the high school, the grade school, and the elementary school. And past that was the A&P and the original location of the fire hall. On past that, you ran into the Mountain Echo Publisher Building, Ross and Brown's Hardware Store, Dotson's Toy Store, Dr. Connick's doctor's office, the American Store, which later became the Acme, and the bank. On the other side of Union Street, coming back up, you had Courtwright's store, which later became Ben Franklin. You had the drugstore, which was originally Bannon's drugstore, later became Ray and Derrick's. You had Sam Vidi's shoe store. Coming up from there, interspiced with different houses. You then ran into Pete's, which was a well-known restaurant in town, run by Pete Grover and his wife Annie. Right next to that was the White Star Bakery. People from all over came to get Alex Stepansky's nut roll and the filled donuts that he made. Past that was a building. It was an apartment building. On the first floor, Angela Ludico had a shoe store, or shoemaker's shop. That later moved up to where Barney Colt was. You went up past that, you came to Bart's Cleaners. Across the street was a house where Jake now has his antique shop. Going up the street a little further, you came to Marco's Funeral Home. Up a little further than that, across from the parents' house, was a large apartment building that originally had been a garage and car sales shop underneath. Up beyond that, you had Dr. Coon's house, and then all the rest of Shickshinny on that side were houses until you got to the end of town overlooking the Furnace Street. And before we go any further with that, Jake, maybe you have some comments.
I think the highlight of my younger days was Pete Groover's, the pool hall. I mean, Pete's was open 24 hours a day, 363 days a year. And the reason for its opening that many hours is because of the time of the Forge and the ACNF. And the Warriors, and after the Warriors, there was a lot of government contracts, people working different shifts, so Pete was open. But Pete was famous for his hamburgers. Oh, they were about 1/4 inch thick and 5 inches of grease in the pan. And coffee was a nickel. And I can remember he'd go across the street to buy his coffee, and I worked there as a young man bagging groceries and so on, but he'd buy the coffee, and he was selling the coffee for 5 cents a cup. My God, he raised it to 10 cents, and people said, "What, are you crazy? Who the heck is going to pay 10 cents for a cup of coffee?" So, and that's the part I would say about Pete's. It was really the highlight, especially for a young man. Girls didn't go there. They weren't allowed in the back room where the pool table was. There was all kind of magazines, and they were current magazines, comic books, and most of the time they would let you sit down and read one even if you didn't pay for it. But I would like to also say that Shickshinny, the name, is the type of, it's a catchy name. People remember it. And way back when, Henry Jones was the sheriff of Shickshinny. So Henry took a $5 a week raise to be the sheriff of Wilkes-Barre. And one of the incidents that I particularly remember, it was told me by his son, Decker. By the way, Decker was an excellent pool shot. But Henry had a call to go to Boston to pick up a prisoner. So Henry and his deputy went to Boston, and they went to the courthouse, presented themselves, and one of the court clerks says, "Oh, the judge is waiting for you in his chambers." So they proceeded to the chambers, and there was a very attractive woman in there. She was sitting on the desk, and she was very friendly, talking. She was not the judge or anything else, but she said, "Where are you guys from? You boys from?" And they said, "Oh, little town in Pennsylvania." She says, "Well, try me." She says, "I've been to Jake's in Shickshinny, PA." The woman was Bette Davis, the actress. So you got to think about it. Jake's was the place to go at the time.
You mentioned Pete's. Were there any celebrities that ever went to Pete's?
Well, there's a little story about, you ever hear Bobby Darin sing Mac the Knife? There's one particular part of the song where he sings, and it sounds like Shickshinny Diver. Well, at the time, you know, the dishwashers were called pearl divers. That was just whatever misnomer they put it on them. And supposedly Bobby Darin came to town, and this is before he became known or famous or whatever, and he stopped at Pete's and really didn't have enough money to pay for everything, so he was washing dishes. So, pearl diver, Shickshinny, Mac the Knife, you know, Shickshinny Diver, true or not?
That's the story I heard too.
That's the story I heard.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting. You guys, of course, grew up in the Shickshinny was a thriving area and stuff.
Yes, yeah.
We have documents that said back in 1940, Shickshinny had 2,400 people. Claude Smith wrote an article along with some woman that we have here that back in 1926 said there was 2,600 people and 52 businesses here. Does Does that sound realistic to you gentlemen? Or-
Positively.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Brian.
When I was in high school, I remember hearing we had 2,500 people in Shickshinny, rounded up, of course. And it was a thriving community, and we had self-contained movie theater, bowling alley that had closed, 7 or 8 bars and restaurants. You had everything that a small town would want. Unfortunately, a lot of people, for some reason, didn't think that was good enough and took their shopping to Nanticoke or Wilkes-Barre or Berwick. But it was really a great place to grow up. I started grade school in 1948, and my growing up years, of course, the 50s and the 60s. And it's looking at what Shickshinny was and what it is now, it's kind of sad to think of what's happened, but of course that's life. And,
True.
that's how it goes.
I worked in the Acme as a bag boy, and I can remember on a Friday night, all the people from the country, this was their shopping. There was Shickshinny, there was no place to park. And the A&P store was up right now at the end of town where the fire hall was. And I can remember bagging groceries, and there was absolutely no place for people to park. So I would push the cart with the people's groceries up by Bertzel's Church. That's where parking, every spot was taken. Main Street all the way down to the bridge, and north past the VFW. People would actually participate in almost anything here. And it was really an interesting thing. The other thing is the old Opera House, I can remember at the time. In fact, we owned it for a period of time. And going back prior to our time, but that was, I would call, the first mall of its day. People would come to the Opera House, and they had livestock. They would sold. They farm implements and so on and so forth. And if they were fortunate enough, there would be a presentation, a play of some sort that particular night. But that's where it was. And by the way, Shickshinny High School played their first basketball game in the old Opera House. So I cannot give you the exact date, but that was the information I had when
Prior to 1935.
prior to 1935.
And I understand they had the graduations there.
They did. They had a piano, and they would play whatever the proper music would be for that particular day, and it was an exciting day. My mother passed away at the age of 102, and she remembered going to presentations of different plays there and so on and so forth. So it was the event.
Talking about shopping on Thursday night, when I started practicing law, I opened an office in Shickshinny, and I picked Thursday night in particular to have office hours, because that's what we called farmers' night in Shickshinny, because people from the back country would come in to do their shopping, as Jake said. And of course the town was full of people in those days, and there were a lot of things to do other than go see a lawyer, but it was convenient for me at the time.
Another thing was the Centennial, 1961. This was if you didn't experience it, there's no way that we could convey really what happened, but it was an event that lasted probably for months. Leading up to the Centennial, the men had to grow beards, and the women would wear these long dresses, and you were, as a man, a male, if you didn't have a beard, you were fined certain things. But the highlight of that particular Centennial was the parade. The parade that day, we had the motorcycle drill team from Philadelphia come up, about 20 or 30 motorcycles that actually drove in mass with an escort truck. And one of the members of that motorcycle drill team was Frank Rizzo, who became mayor of Philadelphia.
They stayed at the Coleman Motel, didn't
They did. They stayed at the Coolnook, and I can remember, I shouldn't tell this, but I'm going to tell it anyway.
Okay.
They had a big cube van, and there must have been 100 cases of beer in it. And I can remember, this is fact, the sergeant in charge says, okay guys, take off your firearms. So in the old Coolnook, there was a little store, and they all put their pistols, the gun belts right on the shelves where the bread was and everything else. So all these guns were there, they weren't secured, no ammunition was secured, but that's where the pistols stayed in the duration that they were here. And they would entertain the local townspeople with rides on their motorcycles. And they performed on Union Street, standing on the seats of the bikes and just doing all kind of tricks. It was really something to see. And I do have a film, if I can find it, I'm going to give it to you.
Okay.
That thing, it's the parade and everything else. And Brian Caverly is in it with his Model A and Snugsy, and they look like a bunch of gangsters coming down the street.
How did you film that movie?
The movie, I didn't film it, a friend of mine filmed it, but the motorcycle drill team, when they were going to perform the particular day of the parade, and I asked if I could ride alongside of the motorcycles and film it. And no, Frank Rizzo says, no. He says, he called one of the troopers over and says, hey, Jake's gonna ride on the back of your bike. So I'm sitting backwards on his bike as we're going through the procession of the motorcycles. He says, and you just tell him what you want him to do and cross over or whatever. I was just thrilled to be able to film this fantastic event.
You were not strapped in or anything?
No way, just sitting cross-legged on the bike. And coming into town here, we ended up in Bill Kerwitz, and that's where all the dignitaries were. And it was just so interesting to see. So it was part of history.
You were talking about Pete Grover before, and you said that some of the men didn't grow mustaches, but do you remember Pete grew a half a mustache?
He grew a half a mustache because he said it was a half-ass centennial.
Half-ass mustache or a half-ass centennial?
Yeah, well, I will mention one thing since you mentioned Pete Gruber and his hamburgers. Supposedly, right over on that chair is the pan that he cooked all those hamburgers in. That was given to us by Annie's relation or somebody, and said it came from Pete Gruber. So I can't verify that for sure, but that's what we were told when we were given the pan. So, and if you guys want a hamburger afterwards, I'll cook you one up in that pan.
You don't have to grease.
Well, the nice thing was all of these sides that you got with the hamburgers when you went in there. Remember?
I don't remember too much about
You got no sides.
No sides. You got an onion, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. You got a hamburger. He used to get irritated at people who would want something else, like salad or coleslaw or something.
Oh,
You got a
Pete was a
hamburger.
character. If you wanted 2 hamburgers, order 2. You don't order one and then say, hey, Pete, I want another one. He said, I don't have any more.
We had a lot of characters in Shickshinny, and by that I mean people who were genuinely kind and nice and just were nice people, and we were fortunate to have them. I'm sure we still have a lot like that, but they really added to the community, made Shickshinny what it was and what it is today.
Can you name one?
West Creek.
Okay, I was just gonna ask you about that, because I do remember him, so tell everybody about Wes.
Well, you have a picture of the Centennial over there,
Yes.
and in the front view, there's somebody in a mask pushing a baby carriage.
Oh.
That was Wes Dietrich. He would dress up and he would push this baby carriage through town. I don't know what the purpose was, but Wes was a real nice guy. A little bit different, but he was part of the parade.
I do remember him, and I thought I remember him dressing up as an Indian or a cowboy,
I'm sure
standing down there by where Ben
He
Franklin
did that too. It
was.
wasn't just.
Yeah.
Well, he had many costumes he put on. Another character was Charlie Long, and Brian actually represented Charlie Long in some type of court case. Would you elaborate on that a little?
Well, Charlie had a speech impediment, and Charlie had difficulty having people understand him.
Yeah.
And my father, in particular, seemed to be able to understand Charlie. And I don't know if it was because of the same blood or not, but I also could understand Charlie better than other people. And one night when I was in law school, Charlie came into the Mountain Inn. And the Mountain Inn had the phone on the wall behind where people sat at the bar. It was an oval bar. And Charlie came in, and I was talking to somebody, and I could hear Charlie on the phone. And, he had a cleft palate.
Right.
And he was on the phone and he's talking to somebody and he's obviously getting mad because he's, and I'm thinking, poor Charlie, whoever's on the phone doesn't understand him. So I get out, being a good Samaritan, and I said, Charlie, maybe I can help, talk to whoever's there and see if they can tell me what the problem is. So I said what it was and that, can you tell me what you want and I'll see if I can help. And from the other end of the phone came this, was one of Charlie's relatives who had the same speech.
All right. Okay.
Well, so Jake, one of your things today that you do is you keep the parade running.
Yes.
That's here. Would you tell us a little bit about the parade while
I
we're on
will.
the subject of Shickshinny, since it's very well known and it's been going for so long? So.
Well, Shickshinny has one of the longest continuously held Memorial Day parades in the nation. Other people have longer parades perhaps, but during Vietnam, some people became politically correct and they didn't want to have honor the veterans at that particular time. It was a time when I was in the service, and I can remember, the turmoils that we were traveling different cities and how you were affected by the people. But proud of the fact that Shickshinny does have one of the longest continuously held parades in the nation, and that's something really Shickshinny is to be proud of.
And I think because you organize it, run it and stuff, to be recognized that you're responsible for keeping this thing going, and we thank you for doing that.
It's an honor to do it.
Yeah.
It truly is an honor.
Yeah. Brian, do you have anything to add on as we close out this episode?
Well, we're talking about a particular section of town. I have a lot of remembrances and memories of Shickshinny, but it would take more than a half an hour to talk about all
Well,
those
we're
different
going to go,
things.
and you're going to be in the next episode as well.
Okay.
We're going to do episode 34 as well with you gentlemen, as long as you're here. All right, so, we want to thank these gentlemen for coming in. They're also, most people don't know this, but they're also responsible for the starting up of the Historical Society, and there probably would not have been a Historical Society if these guys didn't get together. And with the knowledge that they have, they both donated items, and they're two of my mentors as far as learning when I give tours, so I can give accurate information and stuff. And I'm greatly appreciative of these two guys coming and stuff. So this is Jimmy Bach, along with my producer Chandler Holmes, along with Brian Caverly and Jake Baluta, signing off on episode 33. Thank you for watching.